Hello, everybody. Welcome to Litfic on a Mighty Blaze. The blaze was sparked when COVID-19 extinguished the traditional in-person book tour, and our New York Times bestselling authors and co-founders, Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt, joined forces to promote books coming out. So welcome again. I am Bo Ellis. I am a social media director here at The Blaze, a writer myself, and also a producer. We have the amazing author, Emma Gray, here today. Emma is a novelist, a feature writer, photographer, professional speaker, and accountability coach. This is The Last Love Note, her current release that we will be discussing today, and my background blur is fighting me on this beautiful cover, tragically. Emma Gray has been writing fiction since she first fell for Anne of Green Gables at 14, which I think a lot of us can relate to, and is the author of the YA novels Unrequited, Boy Band Meets Girl, Tilly McGuire and the Royal Wedding Mess, and the nonfiction title I Don't Have Time, and the parenting memoir Wits End Before Breakfast, Confessions of a Working Mom. She also wrote, along with her school friend, Sally Whitwell, 2 musicals, Deadpan Anti-Fan and Fairy Tale Derail, based off her novels, which is very cool to me. Love musicals. And she wrote her first adult novel, The Last Love Note, in the wake of her husband's death. It's a fictional tribute to their love and the attempt to articulate the magnitude of her loss and a life-affirming commitment to hope. And she lives in Australia. So, Emma, it's a lot later for her right now than it is for me. So, The Last Love Note is a beautiful novel that is kind of half rom-com, half grief story in the genre of almost fiction about Kate, who has lost her husband and 2 years later is now being kind of romantically trapped on a beautiful resort with her boss, Hugh, who she is beginning to maybe see in a different light. And it is a very amazing book. So hello to Katie and Anissa. Glad to have you here. So Emma, how are you doing today? Or this evening, I guess, for you.
This morning, even over here.
Yes.
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. It's morning for me, and it's a very morning in the more traditional sense for me. Yes. So it's been great. How has your tour been going? I know you mentioned that you'll be setting off on it more. So how's that been going? I know Zibby Books is known for her exciting tour experiences.
I am very excited. I'm surrounded by bags and packing, and we're flying out of Sydney in a couple of days and coming to the States, and I'll be there for 3 or 4 weeks, which is going to be amazing. Bringing my little boy, who's now not so little, he's taller than me now, but he's 13, so it'll be his first time there, and we're just so excited. And I can't wait to meet a lot of Zibby's other authors who I haven't met yet. I've only sort of met them in events like this online, so it's going to be fantastic. And to meet Zibby herself.
Yeah, that'll be really exciting. And I know it'll be a super fun tour. All the places you've mentioned going sound really great. Also, every Zibby author I've met has been so amazing and so kind. So I'm sure it will be lovely to meet them again.
Yes, it will.
Yes. So recently I've interviewed 2 people who've written memoirs, and that's how they chose to tell their personal story. But you chose the genre of almost fiction, which is where you combine a lot of personal experience, but it's still fictionalized, so it blurs that kind of line. Why did you choose this instead of maybe a more traditional memoir?
So my husband, Jeff, died in 2016. And as a writer, and I'm sure that any writer on this call will sort of resonate with this, I knew that I was going to have to process this loss through writing, because I felt like I couldn't understand what was going through my mind until it had appeared on a page. And so I knew I would be writing, and I would probably write a book, but I just didn't know what sort of book it would be. And I sort of thought about, I could have written almost a self-help book, because I had written a nonfiction book before. And then I had so many books given to me that were amazing, and I thought, I don't really need to reinvent the wheel on this. There are some amazing books out there. And then I did consider memoir, but we've got, I am quite an oversharer myself, but the rest of the family is not. So I just had to be careful that I was protecting their privacy, because it's such a deeply emotional topic. And so I had written a couple of teenage novels, and I loved writing fiction. And as you mentioned before, I was this romantic from a long way back in the Anne of Green Gables days as a teenager. And so it was kind of inevitable that this would be more than a grief novel, and that it would turn into the next steps as well. And I really loved sort of playing around in this what if world of my character Kate, still processing the loss of her husband, but beginning to have feelings for someone else. And that's fictional for me, but never say never. But it was, again, it was actually really a nice thing for me to be able to do, to imagine what that would be like. And but at the same time, it meant that I could put all of my very genuine, deep emotions and loss into this book. And I think that's the thing that people have been resonating with in Australia. It was published here by Penguin in January, so I've already been talking to readers all year about this. And there's been a lot of people who've lost somebody, whether it's their partner or somebody else that's really important to them, who have said to me that I have articulated for them something that they couldn't put into words. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this. And I'm just glad to be able to contribute something, because grief, I don't think we talk enough about, and it makes it very difficult when it happens to you.
And that's something that I've discussed somewhat with the last memoir that I interviewed about, where we have this kind of model of grief, of the 5 stages of grief that you get told, and then your experience is never really like that.
No, it's not. And in fact, I'm 7 years into this now, and I've got another layer of grief. My mum passed away 4 months ago, and so I've been going through all of that again in a different way. And I'm still learning. I remember with this book thinking, I think it's I sort of did the first draft, and I thought, I think that's sort of done. And then I put it away and kept going through my life, and realizing, actually, no, I didn't really know enough yet to stop writing this book. So it took 3 years in the end to write, because there was so much that kept happening. I think we like to think that our grief will be over quickly, and it isn't. You carry it with you for the rest of your life. So it just changes in time. So I was grieving in real time while writing the book, and I think that probably comes through.
And I think that is something, again, with that grief model, the last stage is acceptance, which sounds like you accept it, so you're over it, you've processed it, whatever that means. And I don't know if I've ever met anyone, I certainly haven't experienced it myself, who has gotten to that mythical stage where it's all accepted.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, you can sort of accept, you can believe that it has happened at last. You can finally accept this has happened and I can't change it. But, you will continually have little triggers that come up. I mean, this whole thing, publishing this book, going to America, having this book tour, has pushed a few buttons for me already, in terms of, I wouldn't have written this book had my husband not died. So there's almost an element of survivor guilt for having this experience, which I've had to sort of work through. And then there's this whole thing of doing something so exciting that I've wanted for so many years, and not being able to share it with him, and not being able to share it with my mum as well. And that's another thing that's really hard. I think once you've lost somebody very close to you, even the good stuff is tinged with sadness as well.
And that was something where I was wondering how difficult it was to get asked sort of questions about that. It's the thing where, in asking about memoirs, I always feel myself, like I'm putting you on the back foot because I'm inherently asking about something a lot more personal than maybe I would typically ask somebody about. Has it been challenging to kind of do these readings and get questions? You mentioned it has pushed some buttons.
Mm.
Is
It
it? Yeah.
Yeah, certainly there have been times when I've felt a bit overwhelmed with all the
Mhm.
emotion of it. There has been a lot of crying, whether it's not so much me, but people at book talks and people
Mhm.
who, I've been sitting there trying to sign books and the whole queue is crying, and they come up and say,
Yeah.
"I thought I wouldn't cry," and then this absolutely bawling,
Mhm.
and it's there's a lot of hugging has been going on at these book talks as well,
Yes.
which is actually beautiful, and it's
Mhm.
everything. And I think you've just got to dispense with the idea that you have to have your act together the whole time when you're talking about something like this. That's
Mhm.
not natural. So, being that sort of open and real about it, I think is the reason I wrote it. And I wanted to write the book I wish I could have read after Jeff
Mhm.
died. And I think it's just generating this conversation is one of
Mhm.
the most important aspects. So, but I have had to sort of, in fact, my sister has been really good with this. She has noticed when things have got a bit too much for me,
Mhm.
and she'll say things like, "You need to put your phone down. We're going to go to the beach for the day," or "You just
Mhm.
need to have a bit of a breather and stop thinking about it."
Mhm.
So that's the thing. You've got to have other things in your life. I love
Mhm.
photography and I
Yeah.
love the garden and things like that. So you've just got to get get out of the world that you're talking about all the time, and
Mhm.
it must be the same for people who write memoirs that are on
Yeah.
very deep personal topics as well.
Mhm. And that is something. It's great that you have your sister there to be a support.
Mm.
And that is something people have mentioned with memoirs, that they love that it opens this conversation and that people are able to come to them like, I had this similar experience,
Mm.
and these are words that have meant so much to me. And has it been sort of healing, or at least just a nice feeling for you knowing that your words are being what you wish you had for these other
Yes.
people?
Yeah. I mean, it was very cathartic to write in the
Mhm.
first place. It certainly did feel like I was finally able to express everything that I'd been feeling and not necessarily
Mhm.
having the words for before. Um, but even this week, I had a message from a woman whose husband died 5 months ago, and she was saying that she'd been having a particularly difficult day, and she just picked up the book and started reading it and felt less alone, and that
Mhm.
somebody else understood. And I think books can be like that for us. All kinds of books can be like that for
Yeah.
us. It's almost like they're a friend. Um,
Mhm.
but it has been really a therapeutic thing for me to be able to have the conversations. The more
Mhm.
people you meet that share what you're going through, it's not that the problem is halved, but it's just that you feel like somebody else understands.
Mhm. And I think that's the beautiful thing about stories like this, is even if somebody never gets the chance to actually directly speak with you, if they read it and feel that connection, then they can feel that support regardless of ever if they get to personally talk to you, which is the
Mm,
beautiful thing about books and why we all care so much about them.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yes. And one thing, and your anecdote about this, your sister reminded me of it, is that one thing I loved about this book is while it is a romance story, it focuses on a lot of different kinds of love, from talking about Kate and Cam, her husband who passed, Kate and Hugh, her new love interest, the love of Grace, her best friend, her love with her mother. That was a side story that I loved experiencing a lot, and her love of Charlie, her son, and Knightley, the puppy. That was such a beautiful, devastating part of this novel.
That was one of the parts of it that was directly from my own life.
Yeah.
We lost our
Mhm.
dog Nightly, and I
Mhm.
had to write about that as well to sort of
Yes.
immortalize him
Mhm. No,
and
I.
just help process that. That loss actually hit me harder than I imagined it would, because having lost my husband, I thought it's going to be really sad to lose a pet, but surely it's not going to be, just
Mhm.
sweep the rug out from under me the way that it had when Jeff died. But we were completely devastated. It was awful. And it was one of those things where until you've been through it, you don't understand. So, but you're right, there are a lot of different types of love explored in this book. And one of the ones I think that I enjoyed exploring was the mother. And I think in that I was thinking of my own dad, who had to witness his daughter and his grandson losing their husband and father. And it helped me to put myself in his shoes and try to imagine the devastation that it must be to see your child and grandchild so brokenhearted. And Kate underestimates that in the book until she figures it out. And I think that was, I've actually had a couple of parents get in touch with me as well and say, thank you for telling that part of the story, because it's exactly how they had felt when their child had been through this sort of grief.
And that's a story, it was an angle myself reading through this I didn't consider at all. And when I got to that, I felt like I was having that revelation along with Kate of like, oh, wow, that would be something that is so devastating. Like, you know, I've just been a friend to somebody going through something like this, and it was devastating for me because I cared so much about them. I can't, for a parent, that has to be so hard as well.
That's right. And it's great that you were there for your friend, because I think that's something else that happens, is that people, they say that grief rearranges your address book, and it does. There are people who can't handle it and who sort of disappear, and there are new people that just step up, and people who step up who are unexpectedly there for you. And, you know, that there's an opening scene in this book where she's in the supermarket, which anyone who's ever lost someone will understand is one of the most confronting things you can do, because it's just this emblem of life going on as normal. And, you know, everyone's just acting like nothing's happened, because, of course, to them it hasn't. And, you know, you're in there and you're trying to shop, and you're walking past all these products that you're never going to need to buy again, because they don't need the shaving cream or the, you know, the razors or whatever it is. And then I had a person I knew sort of hove into sight in the aisle and see me and back out and go away, because she just couldn't handle the conversation. And that sort of thing happens a lot. So they were the little sort of snippets of reality that I wanted to put in here. Just, I think it's educational almost, not even though it's a rom-com and you know, all of that. I think there's a lot in there that people will learn as well.
No, and I think that's, those anecdotes are so true to life, where some people can't handle it, because it is the thing where when you're supporting someone who is in grief, you feel like everything you're saying is pretty silly in a sense. You're like, I know what I'm saying does absolutely nothing. I just hope you know by me saying it means I am here for you. And that's what I'm trying to convey.
That's it. And I've always said to people, none of us know what to say in this situation, including the person who's lost someone, and that it's enough for you to just turn up and say, I don't know what to say. And that's it. That's all you have to say. You just have to be there. And I think we just put so much expectation on ourselves to say the right thing. And we don't, and that's fine. It's more about just caring for them and being there. And I think we really hope that people's grief will be short-lived, because we just want to get through this so that everything goes back to normal. And it takes a really special friend to be able to sit by you through this whole experience and be there for you, you know, at times when, you know, you're falling apart, and you know, and then pick you up and give you beautiful experiences as well as you're ready to do that.
Yes, and I do think the educational part of this book is such a fascinating and great part of it, that even if you're somebody who hasn't experienced anything like this, I mean, it's still a beautiful, worthwhile read, because it's so well written and it delves into so many emotions, and it's also got this beautiful love story that's very fun to watch unfold. But it's also nice to just have more books like this that are open and frank about a conversation of grief, which I know you're Australian. I know in America, we are so scared a lot of the time to talk about death in predominant American
Yeah,
culture.
it's the same here. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
where and maybe it's because we're both British descended. We're
Mm.
we have
Yeah,
the same.
stiff upper lip thing. Yeah,
Yes.
it happens, and people just have. I mean, we don't even want to talk about it in advance. It's almost as if
Mhm.
it's contagious. If we
Yes.
talk about it, that might happen to us. It will happen to everybody. That's the
Mhm.
point. You know, it's going to happen to every single one of us if we love a single other person. You know,
Mhm.
let alone lots of people that we love. So we need to talk about it. You've got a brilliant expert there in the US, Megan Devine.
Mhm.
She's written a book called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And she has a Facebook page and a website called Refuge in Grief. And she has
Mhm.
been absolutely brilliant. She's probably the reason I didn't write a nonfiction book,
Mhm.
actually, because I didn't need to, because she'd written so well on this. She lost
Mhm.
her husband. I think she was 30 when he died, and um, I always recommend. So that's sort of my go-to recommendation if anyone ever
Mhm.
wants to have some expertise. She's a psychologist as well, so
Mhm.
she understands it from both perspectives. But um, yes, it's not something we do well,
Mhm.
and there are so many other cultures in the world that do it really well, and it sort of regard death as part of life and embrace
Mhm.
it, and children are around it, and it's sort of more normalized than they are here.
Yes, and that's I when I took college courses that sort of focused on these cultures where death is just woven into everything they do.
Mm.
And I was like, that seems like such a nicer way to grow up in a sense, having that where you're just it feels like a lot more prepared. Whereas
Mm.
in our cultures, I feel like the first time you get hit with a loss, it's very much that rug pulled out from under you feeling. And
It
then,
is, yeah.
you know.
And I've really noticed it with the loss of my mum, even though
Mhm.
it was just so different because she was 91, so it was just a completely different
Mhm.
situation. But because I actually lost Jeff suddenly. He had a heart attack,
Mhm.
and there was no time to say goodbye. And then, my son, who was 5 at the time, took a long time to even believe what had happened. We all did, actually.
Mhm.
But with mum, she had Alzheimer's, so that was a long decline. And her death was absolutely beautiful in the end. And she was surrounded by grandchildren and all of us,
Mhm.
and the two could not have been more different. And I'm sure that a lot of the grief that then came up about mum, while it was different, I felt like I've done this before. I know that we will survive, and
Mhm.
that what to expect. It was almost the same, a similar way to how if you've got a child and then you have another child, you kind of know a lot of it, but some of
Mhm.
it is new because it's a different person that you're raising.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think every single grief that we face for each person will be different. But the grief literacy, I think, is what we need more of through just
Yes.
these sorts of conversations.
Mhm. Grief literacy is a term that I'm hearing for the first time now, but
Mm.
that's a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
But yes, and that was something I also wanted to mention that in this book, Cam, Kate's husband, passes of Alzheimer's, which is different from your personal experience, but you wrote it so true to life of
Mm.
experiencing that, which I'm sure a lot came from your mother's passing as well. Did you do any extra research for this, or did you feel
Yeah.
like life had given you a lot?
I felt very, very we had a lot of experience in this
Mhm.
with mum and going with her to doctor's appointments and things like that. So I knew I would sit there with the geriatrician and watch the tests that they do and
Mhm.
that sort of thing. But I still did some research as well, just to make sure that, and although it's hard with things like this because the research is changing and the approaches are changing all the time, which is wonderful because
Mhm.
it's one of those diseases that we need to get a cure for.
Mhm.
Um, but it gave me the chance to tell a story that wasn't exactly our own. Um, I also am a member of a group of young widowed people in my region here. I am 50, but that's young to lose
Yes.
a partner. So, and there are people in that group that are much younger than me as well. And I've become friends with them, and I was sort of careful I didn't want to choose a cause of death that was sort of too similar to any of their stories either. And so this was, it was a good choice, I think, for the story, because it was something that I do have a lot of experience with personally in the family. And I think too, the fact that it's a longer death, a longer decline, gave me, just as a writer, more room to explore other parts of them coming to terms with this and the complexity involved.
Yeah. Which it is a beautiful novel to read, that sort of complexity, and having experienced something similar to that of my own grandfather passing of Alzheimer's, which is similar but different, of course, as all of these situations are. It was nice to, in a strange way, nice to read a similar experience, which is just what we talked about, that it's beautiful to read these similar experiences. And that was also, this book achieves such a beautiful balance of romantic comedy, which is a genre we think of as being like kind of only fluff or very light, and grief story, very realistic, heartbreaking grief story. How did you achieve such a balance between that?
It's, I think it's just who I am. I gravitate towards the romantic comedy a lot. I watch a lot of romantic comedy. So I kind of wanted people to read this book, and even though they will have been through the ringer emotionally by the time they get to the ending, I did want them to sort of finish reading it as if they've just walked out of one of those great Richard Curtis rom-coms that we've sort of loved for years. Because I love that feeling. I love that sense of satisfaction from one of those escapist sort of films. So that I wanted to create that kind of vibe as well. And just because that's what I love to read. But and also it's just so much fun to write. And then the other thing is too, that even when somebody has died, there's still a lot of humor and lightness. And I went to a funeral only last Friday of a friend's husband, and there was so much laughter during that service, just talking about his, the funny things that he used to do and all of that. And there's always a lot of warmth. And so I think that life is like this. It's light and shade. It's up and down, and it's never all one or all the other. So I wanted to sort of carefully weave the two of those things together. And so I've had people say they've been crying and then on the same page they're laughing. And it's I don't know, that's just how it's come out. But because I don't plot these novels either, it just sort of all falls onto the page. But I wanted to take some of the funny things that have happened in our life and so there's a whole scene at the start where her little boy walks out with a Vietnam era grenade in his hand from his father's study. Well, that actually happened to us. So we didn't have a neighbor with us and, the lovely boss, but all the rest did. The bomb squad came to our house, and, I remember when it happened thinking, this is going to make a great opening scene in a book one day, and sort of almost taking notes instead of dealing with the situation. But that kind of thing, when you're a writer, whenever something funny like that happens, I think you just got to collect it and use it when you can.
Yes. No, that's something where even I once got into a car accident that was scary for me at first, as they always are. And I was talking to my sister about it, and my sister's also a writer like I am, and she was like, well, now this is another experience that you can write about. And I was like, it's a great way to look at it, instead of just viewing it as solely unfortunate. There's a odd little silver lining that
there are. And I've often thought, I don't know how I'd get through life if I wasn't using things. I just probably in tears a lot more. I think writing is just such a therapeutic activity, and just any sort of creativity, actually. It doesn't matter whether it's writing or singing or painting or gardening or cooking or whatever it is that you're creative in. I think we have to get our feelings out there somehow and express them. And but certainly the humor is it's helpful. It's helpful to just be collecting material.
Yes. And that is the fun part of being a writer, is that you can just tell yourself, oh, this is just another thing. And that is something I process things through writing as well. I process things through reading, which I think is why books like this are so helpful, that those who process through reading can read this and hopefully have a bit of the experience themselves.
Yes, yeah. And I think that we just love nothing more than finding a book that makes us feel understood. And I love it when you read a book and you can see yourself on the page and think, this person doesn't even know me, and yet I feel like they've written my life, that kind of feeling when you read books. So it's nice to be able to contribute a book that may do that for some people.
Yes. One small funny thing I very related to Kate is that she mentioned she goes into like almost a hyper competent mode when in interviews, which is something a similar thing I do, where it's like I do an interview, a job interview, and then I'm like, who even was that person who was just in that interview who was so confident and knew exactly what they were doing? Because I get out of there and I'm like, I wish I could access that part of myself all the time.
That's it. That's probably your acting background, your theatre background helps you in interviews.
No, it is helpful. Job interviews are very similar to stage performances.
It's very unnatural to be put under that kind of pressure, isn't it?
Yes. And it's such a funny thing, because that is just not how somebody's actually going to function at a job. And yet that's how we're testing them for candidacy.
It's similar to sort of high school exams,
Yes.
You would never be placed under that kind of pressure in most workplaces, but we put kids under pressure, don't we? Yeah.
Yes. One thing I loved that Kate has seen, well, the top of her bucket list was seeing the Northern Lights. And I know I saw in your bio that's something that also that's from your life. How many times have you seen the Northern Lights?
Well, I haven't seen the Northern Lights at all, but I've seen the Southern Lights 14 times now. But so that was this bucket list thing. I thought I need to see the Northern Lights for years and years. I thought that. And it wasn't until about, 10 years ago, I realized that we can actually see the Southern Lights in Australia from not far from where I live through a camera, not with the naked eye. But certainly people down further south here can see with their eyes. And so that became a mission for me, and I would go out into the middle of a national park and try and do this. And it took years for me to actually succeed in knowing how this even operated, and then knowing where to go, and then knowing how to use the camera, and then not getting terrified out in the middle of nowhere in the dark. And finally I got all of that in the right place, and it was just absolutely magical, an incredible experience. And I would post about it on Facebook, and then that sort of has generated a crowd of other aurora chasers. So now when I go to the same place, there's anything up to 50 people there in the middle of see anything with the headlights on. But it is so much fun. It's just this beautiful experience. But so I'm still really keen to see the Northern Lights. But it's just as beautiful in either hemisphere. But I wanted Kate to have this goal as well, and for her to find herself. I wanted this to be more than just her relationship with her husband and then her romantic next steps. I wanted it to be about her, because when something like this happens, you do have to reevaluate everything in your life, your work, where you live, how you parent. All of it has to change, and or a lot of it has to change. And so I wanted her to really come to that crossroads and start to think about things that she hadn't done and that she wanted to do, because there is this realization that we get that life is so short, and the world is out there, and if we want to do something, we have to do something about it. I've just watched that incredible movie on Netflix, which was actually one of Zibby's brother's productions, about the marathon swimmer who was 64 when she swam from Cuba to Florida. Incredible. It was 110 miles, and is based on a true story. And it was just so inspiring. And again, I think it's this idea that, she was 64 and she is setting an incredible example of we don't all have to go out and swim 110 miles.
Yeah.
There are things that we might want to
Mhm.
do, and now is the time, no matter what chaos is going on in your life, because we
Mhm.
simply don't know. And I think COVID taught all of us that we can't sort of
Mhm.
wait to travel, and we can't wait to do these things that we're planning to do, later on, because in a moment, everything can change. And so I think that's part of what I wanted to bring in for Kate, that she had these other dreams that she wanted to fulfill, and that they were very important, and in fact more important than her romantic steps. And although you can probably have it all,
Yeah.
have all of it eventually.
Yes.
All at once. Yeah.
Yeah. And now I'm going to also get to some audience questions we had from Katie. What did you learn about yourself after writing the book? Which you've kind of touched on, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to.
I think I learnt to be more courageous, because it is a big deal to talk like this about something so deeply personal, and I sort of had to get over myself and just be vulnerable and
Mhm.
put it out there. And I think what I learnt is that I was very worried before the book came out that the grief in the book might be judged, or that, people would say, why is she thinking that or saying that? And I've got over that now,
Mhm.
and I realise that this kind of conversation is so important that I would, risk any of that stuff just to have
Yes.
these talks. So I think it's courage that I've learnt from writing the book.
No, and I always think to write almost fiction or memoir takes such an amount of bravery to
Mm,
just be able to put yourself out there. And then never mind go on a tour with it, which is a whole other level of bravery, I think.
yeah.
Uh, what does your writing process look like?
Oh, a shambles, absolute chaos. I wish I could say I had this beautiful routine and I
Mhm.
did the same thing every day, but I probably would describe myself as a binge writer. So I might do no writing at all for a long time, and then suddenly the idea will just take over everything, and I
Mhm.
can think of nothing else. The house falls apart. The kids are scrambling to get scraps out of the cupboard for dinner,
Yeah.
and I am just up till 2 in the morning writing, and that'll go on for a few weeks, and that's the first draft, and it just all seems to
Mhm.
sort of tumble out, and I don't plot, so it's just a discovery from the beginning. And so in
Mhm.
this book, for example, I planted a secret between, Kate's husband and her new love interest very early on in the story, but I didn't know what that secret was myself
Mhm.
until almost it was revealed to her. And so, and if I went close to finding out what it was in my mind, I just didn't want to know, because that was almost like a spoiler for myself
Yeah.
while I was writing the book.
Yeah.
So it's all a bit of a frantic
Mhm.
shambles, really, but I love it, and I can't think how to do it any differently. And
Mhm.
I think also the other thing is that because I'm a single mother and I've got so much else going on and I do other work as well, I can't sort of set aside a very luxurious band of time to write. So I simply have to squeeze it in wherever I can, and I'm squeezing it into the nooks and crannies of the day. So I'll take the laptop with me and be writing in a, outside kids sport or dancing or whatever they used to be doing. And I'd be in the car trying to write. And one of my good friends sent a photo of her laptop last night in McDonald's, where
Mhm.
she was sitting for 2 hours
Yeah.
writing her second novel while her kids were off doing something. And so I think for a lot of people that are just so busy, we just have to squeeze it in.
Mhm.
And so for anyone who's sort of thinking, I'm going to write a book when things calm down, they're just not going to calm down. They'll never calm down. Got kids who are now 25 and 23 and things are still going on. So I think just start and just, do it imperfectly.
Yes. I think do it imperfectly is always amazing advice, but that's also great writing advice, because I know we've all thought that of like, oh, I'll have some time in the future. That's when I'll
Mm.
put this, but you're not guaranteed that time in the future. And you also just may not have it. You may be
That's it.
incredibly busy.
And I think, and we also, when we imagine doing it in the future, we're imagining a version of ourselves that really has her act together and is much more organised, is, you know, has great routines, all of that sort of stuff. We're kind of imagining this version of ourselves, and then we get to the future and it's just us, but slightly older with less time. So, you know,
Yeah.
ditch that idea at the start and just get into it.
Okay. What author do you admire and why?
Oh my goodness. Oh, so many.
Yes.
I've got a friend called Nina Campbell, and she has written a feminist revenge thriller called Daughters of Eve, which is now available in the US. And what I admire about her was that she was writing a completely different genre. She was sort of writing romance, historical romances, and sort of almost fantasy elements as well. And she became incredibly passionate about domestic violence. And it was around the time of the Me Too movement, the peak of that. And she just dropped everything and just listened to that passion and just wrote this novel, and it's incredible. So I admire people who will take risks and just follow their heart and follow their passion. So Nina Campbell, Daughters of Eve, look out for that one.
I will. Another question, what did you do on your pub day? Which I know you kind of had 2 pub days, because you had, this has been published since January in Australia, and now it's just getting published in the United States. So.
Yes, so it's it can be a bit of an anticlimax, and I've heard other authors say that. You sort of want to race out to the shops and see your book on the shelves, and quite often it's in boxes out the back. You know, they haven't unpacked it yet, so it can be a little bit of an anticlimax. With one of my other novels, one of the teenage novels, I remember that I didn't do anything, and it was not long after Jeff had died. It was within a year or so, and I remember sitting there on my lounge on my couch with the book in my hand thinking, this is not how I imagined it was going to be. You know, I imagined champagne and him cooking dinner, or us going out for dinner or something. And I just remember sort of watching, it's one of those things where you're on the couch and you can't be bothered getting up, and it gets darker and darker, and then you're sitting in the darkness and you haven't turned the light on, and it was, you know, awful. So my kids, the older kids, were determined that we wouldn't do that this time around. So we went out for dinner, and we then met my sister and her kids and had ice cream. And so we sort of made a family celebration of it. But I'm so looking forward to coming to the US, and we'll be in New York. It's the week of Thanksgiving. It comes out on the 28th of November. And this time I'll be speaking with Zibby at the New York Public Library on the 20th. Which again is an amazing turn of events for me, because that's where I actually wrote the first sentences of this book. My husband was a military historian, and he was in a professional body in the US who flew me over there to a memorial conference in his honor. And it was devastating for me because it felt like a second funeral, but it was beautiful. It was lovely, but very hard. And after that, I went to New York for 3 days, and I'd never been before. And it was really the first time I felt hope after I lost him. I felt that I'm in this incredibly beautiful, dazzling, vibrant city that has experienced so much grief of its own, and it is continuing on. And I remember thinking just an affinity with it, and hoping that I might also have a future that might be beautiful. And so I then took myself to the New York Public Library and thought, I'm just going to symbolically write something that will turn into this book eventually. I didn't know what I was doing at that point. So I did. And in the book, there's a little excerpt of Kate's novel that she's writing, and that is what I wrote in the New York Public Library. And so now to be coming back there and speaking there is just this beautiful full circle experience, to be coming back to the city that really I look back and think that city saved me at the time. So I'm so looking forward to that. I'd love it if people came along to that on the 20th.
Yes, and I've also linked Emma's website in the comments, which I'm sure has the details of that engagement. So
it'll be, I think I think that zibbymedia.com should be putting them up this week as well. So
Yes.
That's another place that you can find all the information.
And this is a question similar to one I had, which is, are you currently working on anything else, if you are allowed to discuss it?
Yes. I have got another book coming out next year called Pictures of You, and it will be coming out both here and with Zibby. And so we're at the editing point with that now. It was actually very hard for me to sort of move on from this one that was so personal and write something very different. But I had such a good time writing this next story, which is sort of a bit of a psychological thriller, but still a romance. So I can't get away from this romance, it just always comes back to that, but I love it. But so it's been really fun to write, and it also explores memory and just having to piece together a life that you didn't understand. So that's been really fun to write, and I'm really looking forward to sharing that with everyone this time next year.
Nice. And I will be looking out for that, and maybe I can even hopefully have you back on here and we can talk about it.
Yeah, be great.
So one of the questions I always like to ask as we're winding down is there anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything you didn't get to talk about that you'd be interested in talking a little about?
I guess the only thing that comes to mind is something that we were chatting about before we went live, which is about our mutual love of theatre, and that I had this incredible experience of working with my high school friend, Sally Whitwell, who is a brilliant composer in Australia. She's won a couple of ARIA awards, which are like our top music industry awards. And we got together and co-wrote a musical based on my teenage novel, which is a book that I wrote for my daughter, who's now 23, but she was about 14. She hated reading. She loved Harry Styles and One Direction. So I thought, I'll just write her a little story about a boy band. And then it just got totally out of control, ended up in two book deal with HarperCollins, and a musical and a second musical. And so it got a life of its own. But I had been writing that musical when Jeff died. And I remember, thinking you would sort of intuitively think musical theatre is the very last thing that goes with grief, But in the end, that was one of the most therapeutic things that happened, that we moved into the audition phase with the kids at a high school within a few months. And then I spent, a couple of months in theatre land, which, as you know, is just this other world. And it was vibrant. We had disco ball, and we had glitter cannons and all this, fun. And again, I think people have an expectation of what they should and shouldn't do when they're grieving, and we need to throw that out the window and realize that you're going to feel awful no matter what you're doing, and that if you can sort of latch on to just a tiny bit of joy in any aspect of your life, then latch onto it and grasp for it, because it's dark enough as it is. We just need to try to grab a hold of the light. And so that's what the musical did for me at a time when I most needed it.
That is beautiful, and a part of why I love theater. It's so transformative to work in. It reminds me kind of Alison Bechdel had Fun Home based off her story, and she's like, I recommend everybody get a musical around their grief. It's very healing. So
I do have a comedian friend who's also a widow, and she said to me the other day, how do you feel about co-writing Widowed, the musical? And I said, I am there. That would be amazing.
I think that would be very amazing. All right. So you kind of talked about this a little, but what are you doing next, and where can people find you and follow you and hopefully come see you?
Yes. Well, if you're on Facebook or Instagram, I'm at Emma Gray Author. And then my website, emmagray.com.au. Follow zibbymedia.com, and all the information about the upcoming tour will be up there. But it's going to be an amazing experience of several different states. I can't wait to come here. I'm having to pack for everything from Miami to Yosemite National Park. So I'm going to have to bring everything because it's going to be all the extremes. But we're not doing a talk at Yosemite. I'm going there with my kids, but it'll just be great if any of you could come along to the bookshops, and we love to support independent booksellers. They are, just so important to authors and readers, and I think it would be great the more people we can get along to these events.
Yes, absolutely. So definitely check out those links in the comments to Emma Gray's social media as well as her website, and follow along with Zibby Media. And thank you so much, Emma Gray, for being on LitFic today. And remember to like, follow, and subscribe to get more amazing authors like Emma.
Well, thanks, Bo. It's been so lovely to talk to you.
Yes. See everyone.